And welcome back to the show. Duffy Duffy is a New York-based personal injury firm that's concentrating its practice on medical malpractice and nursing home abuse. Now, the firm recently announced, after 6 years of litigation and COVID-related delays, that a jury awarded a $2.5 million verdict in the same-day hernia surgery malpractice case. And joining us to tell more details is the lead trial counselor at Duffy Duffy, Cliff Argintar. And Cliff, good to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And as I said in the lead, this case took a little while to get there, but what was the determining factor in this particular case?
Well, we had to push the cases out as hard as we could after the COVID delay. The courts were basically shut down for a year and a half over the COVID pandemic, which created a huge backlog of cases. And in order to get a case out after COVID with the backlog, you have to push, and go to the court and tell them you're ready, and the defense lawyers have to be ready, and there have to be judges available to try the case. One of the things I'll say is that in order to push a case out, you actually have to be there in court. The problem was that after COVID, there was no way to really get in, during COVID, there was no way to really get into the courthouse because everything was virtual, even though the courts were continuing to function. But through a virtual conference, you can't really push the cases out like you would be able to if you were there actually physically present. And so when the courts started to open back up a few months ago, we made every effort we could on behalf of our clients to request in-person conferences, go to the courthouse, tell the judges in the courts that we were ready for trial. And eventually, after we pushed and we were aggressive about it, we were able to get a few cases out. And the recent verdict is one of them. It involves medical care that happened back in 2015. It's not uncommon for a case to be in litigation for 3 to 5 years. But once you get into the 6-year range, the 7-year range, eventually the court is going to say, whether or not all sides are ready or not, if the plaintiff's attorney, which we are, is pushing the case hard enough, you'll eventually get your trial date. So it took a lot of effort. It took getting actually physically back into court, but we're glad we were able to do that, for our client.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about medical malpractice, and we hear it on TV, we watch it unfold in many different areas, but can you define what is medical malpractice for people out there watching?
Yes, medical malpractice is basically another way of saying medical negligence. And in order to prove medical negligence or medical malpractice, you need to prove that a doctor deviated from good and accepted standards of medicine, and that deviation from good and accepted standards caused injury or death. And the way you go about proving that is through medical experts, and both sides are going to have medical experts. We'll have a medical expert in these cases saying that the defendant or the defendant doctors or hospital was negligent and that they deviated from good and accepted standards of medicine. And the defendant and the defense lawyers will have their doctors defending that and disputing that and saying, no, the doctor did not deviate from good and accepted standards of medicine. But you have to be able to prove with your own experts and with the medical records and the testimony of your clients, and ultimately it'll be up to the jury to decide whether or not the doctor committed malpractice.
Yeah, and so I talked to the lead about the hernia discharge case, and give us the facts and the understanding of what went on there.
So in this particular case, my client, who was a woman in her 60s, she was scheduled for a hiatal hernia repair. And the defendant doctor, who was Dr. Alam out in Southampton, he had scheduled her for a same-day procedure, which means an ambulatory procedure, which is in and out the same day. Now, for almost all patients, this is acceptable, okay? It's within the standard of care to perform a hiatal hernia surgery laparoscopically in and out the same day. But for our client and for this particular patient, what we argued and what the jury ultimately believed is that it was not acceptable for the defendant to schedule this surgery same day ambulatory because of her risk factors. And the risk factors that our client had, Mrs. Parr, was that she had had vascular surgery 9 months before the defendant's planned hernia surgery. And because she had stents put in to 2 of her arteries, the celiac artery and the mesenteric artery, that caused her to be an increased risk for postoperative complications. And so what we argued at trial and through our experts and through the medical records is that because of our client's risk factors, she should have been scheduled for an overnight hospital stay. And if she had been scheduled and kept in the hospital overnight rather than discharged the same day, all of her postoperative complications could have been managed much quicker. She would have had a much greater chance for cure and survival, and she would not have passed away the next day.
Amazing. Talk to us a little bit about just that, the fact of people coming forward and bringing cases forward. Are we finding in COVID more and more cases are actually rising in the area of medical malpractice, or is it just the backlog that you're contending with right now?
Well, they're definitely, during COVID, there were definitely less elective procedures, okay? Because all the hospitals were filled up with people with COVID patients and people with severe respiratory illness. So during the actual year and a half, we would see less elective surgery cases, less delay in diagnosis of cancer cases, et cetera. And, also the governor had passed an immunity law saying that for about a year, that if any hospitals or doctors were affiliated with any COVID treatment, that you could not bring a medical malpractice claim for the treatment if it occurred during a specific COVID period. Now that has since gone away. So although there is a lull of medical malpractice cases during the heart of the COVID period, the court was already backlogged before the pandemic. And now we're seeing the same number of medical malpractice cases for the past 6 months, really, since the medical malpractice immunity statute was lifted. So there was a lull during the heat of it, but there will always be medical malpractice. I mean, there was a Johns Hopkins study, I believe, from 2016 that said medical malpractice was the third leading cause of death for people in the United States of America, constituting close to 10% of all deaths. So, medical malpractice is always going to be occurring. And the pandemic sort of just put a pause to new cases for a certain period of time, but they have started to pick back up again.
Yeah. Cliff, we're going to leave it there. Cliff Argintar, who is also the lead trial counsel at Duffy Duffy. We want to thank you so much for being with us here on Open.
Thank you very much for having me.
All righty, and for more information, you can visit the website at duffyduffylaw.com and then follow them on Twitter at DuffyDuffyLaw. We got more show coming up. Encourage you, don't go anywhere. Open continues coming up in a few.